In this episode of the Physical Education Podcast, we're going to be looking at how to restore range of motion, the core concepts to understand, and the hidden reason why a lot of mobility programs don't work. Check it out. So welcome to today's episode. We're going to be looking at range of motion, exploring range of motion. So basically, the overarching concepts that I encourage you to understand when you're navigating your pain, when you're wanting to get better, the way to kind of conceptualize the range of motion that you have and how that is different from the range of motion that you would like to have, and just sort of thinking about how your joints move and how to improve their movement. After that, we're also going to look at some strategies to kind of get you going, but I think it's really important to have an understanding, sort of have a kind of a framework or a visual of what's going on and what we're trying to achieve, rather than just sort of blindly doing an exercise because, you know, the YouTube video shows you and tells you to do that exercise. So range of motion. Presumably you're in pain, you're dealing with pain, and what you're going to find is that with injuries, with issues, with health issues, your body is losing its ability to move. And we want the ability to move, mostly because we want the ability to do things. We want things to be functioning properly. So you're no doubt have some level of range of motion issues. And what we first want to do and first want to understand is the distinction between what is our potential range of motion and our active range of motion. So your potential range of motion is what you should be able to do by virtue of being a human being. And this is going to be fairly consistent across the board. So every human being should have the ability to flex their shoulder up like this. If you're watching, extend it back a certain degree, abduct it, so flex it out to the side, adduct it, so bring it back across your chest. So these are movements in different planes of motion. So lifting straight up, flexion, what you might call lateral flexion, so bringing your arm out to the side like you're making a T shape with your arms, and then rotation. So these are our three planes of motion. They're called sagittal, frontal, and transverse. You don't need to know that, but they're basically flexing in different directions and rotating. And that also works then in 3 dimensions. So when we put all these things together, we can have flexion plus flexion out to the side, or abduction, and then rotation, external rotation. So you can try this with me if you're not watching. I'll try and describe it clearly. Bring your arm forward, keep your arm straight, bring it forward, and then a bit out to the side like you're doing a Y shape, and then rotate your palm further up to the ceiling or further down towards the wall to your right or to your left. And that is putting together all of these movements. We're going to get into that in a bit more detail, but that is, we have our potential range of motion, which is what should be consistent across the human species. So we know that reliably every human is going to have knees that work a certain way. So the knees bend a certain way and they don't bend the other way. They have a slight degree of hyperextension, but knees only really flex one way, which is bringing the heel to your hip, and that's consistent. So that is the potential. So we should be able to say, with whatever you're dealing with, we should be able to say reliably that, okay, that's what you're dealing with, but this is what you should be able to access. There is a potential range of motion that you should be able to access. Now, that's the goal. We're establishing the goal. We're getting clear on what we want to be able to do. Then we need to establish what is our active range of motion. So that is what you can actually do. So what you have voluntary control of. So the way I think about this is you have a line. And again, this works in 3 dimensions, but to keep it simple for now, we have a line, and that is the potential. And within that, there is the active range of motion. Now, ideally, we want the active and the potential to match each other perfectly. That's often unlikely to happen for every single joint in the body, just because that would require very little trauma to have been experienced, and it would require a lot of active effort. But and that goes back to the previous episode where we need to kind of consider, well, what's the goal, what's the priority, what's important to you. But just to be clear, it doesn't need to be perfect, but we want to establish what is the distinction between your potential and your active range of motion. And the way we do that then is, again, you can take this joint by joint. I'm just going to give you the overarching concept, but you can say, well, I have problems with my shoulder, I have problems with my back. What should a shoulder or back be able to do? Well, the shoulder should be able to flex, abduct, it should be able to extend back, it should be able to externally rotate and internally rotate. My back should be able to extend, should be able to flex, laterally flex, should be able to rotate. And you're building a representation of what you can do, and that's really important. Your body, your brain has this map of what is possible, and we want to expand that map towards what the potential is. So you're going to pick a joint. I'm going to use the shoulder for the duration of this video just because it's convenient for the video, and it's easy to follow along with. But suppose I have a shoulder issue, and I mean, some of this is going to be self-evident, without me telling you, but perhaps I have a shoulder issue, and when I bring my shoulder straight up, even to shoulder level, so my arm is straight out in front, I struggle, I start to get a pinch or whatever. So I understand, without being told, I'm assuming that I should be able to lift my arms straight up. I should be able to get a full range of flexion forward, but I can't. So that again, going back to the distinction between our active range of motion and our potential range of motion, we're going to see a large discrepancy. And we'll get into solutions later, but the point is we just want to start embodying this kind of information and getting a grasp of what's going on and where we're lacking. And is it, again, going back to the shoulder, is it simply flexion that struggles? Am I okay if I go out to the side? So lateral flexion or abduction would be the correct term. If I bring the arm out that way, I can go full range and that doesn't cause any issues. But if I go just general forward flexion of the shoulder, then I get issues at this point. So that's telling you information. And what we're doing is we're building a sort of three-dimensional representation of what we can actually do versus what is the potential. So I guess we'll get into that. The way I kind of like to think about this is, suppose you have a sphere, so like this three-dimensional object, and the totality of that, like everything that fills that, is your potential range of motion. So that is taking into account the degrees of motion, flexion and extension, forward and backwards, as well as lateral flexion, so the various axes of motion, and then rotation. So when you put all these things together, you have this sort of three-dimensional movement that can be kind of represented as a sphere. The potential of that is a sphere. But then there are going to be parts of that you can't actually access. So like I said, back to that example, maybe I struggle with forward flexion. So maybe that portion of the sphere is hollowed out rather than being filled, or maybe it's blocked, whatever way you want to think about it. Maybe it's a clear aerated sphere that you can access everything in, and certain areas are blocked off and rigid and you can't get to them, or you can flip that, whatever way you want to think about it. But I want to get a sense of where are the points on that sphere, where are the things that I can't access or I'm struggling to access. And it could be a very large sort of portion of the sphere. It could just be like a straight, like all flexion I have zero access to, or maybe flexion to a point. Or if I, again, going back to the shoulder, what you can find with any joint is that you miss a very specific degree of motion, and you can find that you can get beyond that degree of motion if you work around it. So perhaps I struggle with flexion of my shoulder, up to about 90 degrees. So straight out. And at that point I start to get a pinch. But then I find if I bring it out and over and I kind of loop over that point, then I can actually get further. So that restriction is very much this very specific point in that range of motion. So if we think about this in a three-dimensional sense and try and get a visual sense of what's going on, in the sphere it might just be this one bubble of air or solid bubble in the aerated sphere, again depending on how you want to think about this. But it could just be this very, very specific point. And specific points are going to be interesting. We can get into that a bit later, or maybe we might have to get into that in a separate episode. But consider that specific points rather than full ranges of motion could be more so related to very specific traumas, so specific memories or something that is associated with that specific point. And so the avenue of treatment is going to be a bit different. But for now, we don't need to get into that. This is largely an information gathering exercise. It's an awareness exercise, and that's what we want to do. So these are foundation principles. So that's what we're doing for now. So we have, like I said, this sort of three-dimensional representation of what is possible. And we want to get a sense of how does our active range of motion fill that sphere of what is possible? Do we completely fill that up, meaning that we actively have full access to that entire potential? Or are there certain areas that we can't get to, certain points that we don't want to explore, certain movements that we don't want to access, or maybe can't access no matter how hard we try? And again, that's going to be something to kind of gather, information to gather, and like I said, we'll get into that later on. So hopefully that makes sense. The idea is basically that we have a potential and then we have the active range of motion, and we want to determine what is the difference between the two. Is it a general lack of motion in all directions? So my shoulder is a bit restricted, but it's equally restricted in all directions, and maybe I'm just generally lacking mobility in that joint. Or is it a very specific restriction? It's only in this plane of motion, or it's only in that lateral plane of motion, or it's only rotation, or it's only internal rotation, or only external rotation. So rotating your palm out towards, whatever's to your side away from you, or rotating your palm in towards your body. But yeah, we want to just get a sense of what your joints are doing, because they're your joints. You should have an awareness of what is possible. If I say, what does your shoulder feel like? What does your back feel like? What's it capable of doing? You should have, again, all of this is in the context of you're dealing with chronic pain. You've likely been dealing with it for a long time, and at this point you need to sort of take ownership of this, and you need to start being the conductor of the train, you need to be the driver of the bus and be aware of all the technicalities. Again, you don't need to get into jargon and specific terms, but you need to own your body and have a sense of it. So that's what we're going to be doing. Next thing we want to consider is why does mobility get impaired in the first place? Basically, all you really need to know is that your brain restricts access to certain ranges of motion. Now, there can be mechanical reasons. So you may have had a traumatic injury, maybe a bone broke in a certain way and it was set poorly, or it was just set the best way it could be, or you have an artificial joint, and maybe there is very much a mechanical reason why you cannot access the full potential range of motion, and you can only access what you can access. So it's important to understand that. But again, largely this kind of content is going to be for these kinds of pains that sort of develop out of nowhere or seemingly out of nowhere, and they're not necessarily related to any like a car accident or something like that. But if you have limitations of joint motion that are related to the physical structure, you likely know this because of, the medical treatment that you've received for it. So putting that aside, the reason why you're going to have an inability to access the full potential of range of motion is because your brain is essentially putting the brakes on. It's saying you can't go there because that is unsafe. I'm unfamiliar with that. And that's when injuries come in, usually even traumatic injuries, but your brain is going to have an imprint of what happened, the position you were in, the movements that happened at the time of injury, and it's going to say, don't do that, because when you did that, when the joints were in that position, bad things happened. Pain happened, physical damage happened, and we want to avoid that because, again, an overarching concept is always going to be that your body is primarily concerned with survival and energy conservation in order to survive. So peripheral things like joint motion are less important than brain, heart, lungs, and things for immediate survival. So this is why we covered that in a couple of episodes ago, the energy balance stuff, and it all plays into these similar concepts, which is why these are core concepts. But basically your brain is like an overprotective parent. It's saying, I'm not going to give you access to that because I don't believe that you have the capacity to do that. And a sort of a nice way to realize this or to kind of understand this is when you do a warm-up for a sport or an exercise or something, or when you get up first thing in the morning, you might be a bit stiff, but then you get moving and things loosen up, and it's not that you've suddenly gained this range of motion, that your muscles are longer and your joints are suddenly stronger. It's that you've eased into the movement and you've built the confidence and you've kind of primed the body for what it's about to do. So it's why you warm up for a sport. You're preparing the brain primarily, and because the brain controls everything, the nervous system. I use the term brain and nervous system interchangeably because they're essentially one and the same. But the brain controls everything. It puts the brakes on things. And when you prepare for an activity, you're saying, this is what I'm about to do, and you're easing into it, you're building up into it, and then suddenly you have the capacity to do that. Whereas if you ran up a hill as soon as you got out of bed, you would likely hurt yourself, or you would likely have a limited range of motion. And in that warm-up period, it's not that you're building elasticity or lengthening the muscles or anything like that. It's just that you're preparing the brain and saying, look, this is what I'm about to do, and I'm ready to do this, and it grants you access to that capacity. So when we have traumatic injuries or things that happen over time, basically the brain has kind of sectioned off access to that. It has said, look, that's out of bounds for you, that's not safe, it's not in your best interest to go there. And again, if we think about like our shoulder motion, maybe it's a very, very specific point. If we think of that sphere, it's a very specific point in that sphere that I can't access. Maybe there's something very traumatic there. You can go beyond that, you can go around that, but you are not going there because that is linked to some sort of major trauma. And I will talk about this in a different video because there's so much more to say, but there's very, 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 very interesting things to do with precise movements or precise positions that can bring up significant trauma and emotion. And it's very interesting to explore in the right context. But anyway, your brain is putting on the brakes and it's saying, you're not ready to do this. And the way that we overcome this, so this is our barrier, this is our challenge, this is what we need to overcome. The way we're going to do that is to convince the brain. So this is tremendously important because a lot of exercise and mobility and physical things, sports and exercise, mobility, works around this idea of sort of building and damaging and growing, and you need to damage the body in order for it to grow, and you need to earn, well, no, I won't use that word. You need to basically build this capacity to go further by breaking yourself down in a sense and building up from that. And that is extremely stressful. It can be extremely stressful, as we covered in the last episode. And now, again, whether you want to go through that stress, whether it's kind of necessary for you to go through that for whatever goals you have in your life. That's your decision to make, but we need to be honest about what it is. A better way, particularly with range of motion issues, is to work with the brain, is to convince the brain that you are capable of going further by earning the right. So you put in the time showing that you're proficient at basic things and building and building and building without actually needing to break down the body. So things like bodybuilding is very much about you're using the muscles until they tear, and that is building scar tissue and physical structure. And it's very much dependent on a cycle of destruction and then building, and destruction and building. And again, that's fine if that's what you want to do. That's not what we're doing. We want primarily to keep stress low, because like I said, and I'll say it again, you can't have chronic pain without chronic stress. You can't recover from chronic pain or chronic health issues without addressing chronic stress. So we need to do this without adding unnecessary stress. So hopefully that's clear. And the way we're going to do that is telling the brain that it's safe and working with the brain rather than threatening the brain and creating unnecessary tension and guarding. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about three basic strategies that you can apply to different things. So the first one is simply gentle exploration. And the way I kind of think about this, to use an analogy, is like a scratch card. So you have the scratch card and it's covered in that grey stuff, sticky stuff, and you scratch away to reveal the image. So the image hidden below the scratch card it represents the potential range of motion. It's the totality of what you should be able to do. And maybe you've only partly scratched away the grey kind of sticky film. And what you're left with is an image that isn't fully revealed, but partially revealed, largely revealed. And what has been revealed is it's your active range of motion. So that's what you are able to do in contrast with the potential. And all we're going to do with gentle movement exploration is to sort of, metaphorically scratch away the remainder of, the film on the scratch card to reveal the entire image, to reveal the full potential of movement. So basically what that means is we're just moving. So we're saying, okay, I struggle to get my arm up here. So maybe I'm just going to practice moving my arm up there. It's very, very simple, and maybe it seems too simple. But we're basically saying it's a use it or lose it kind of scenario. And this is going to cover a lot of general lack of mobility that we all tend to get just from time. You'll notice this with babies, with young children. They have a perfect squat, perfect ankle mobility, and they can sit in a squat no problem. And then as you get older, largely because of our culture, we don't tend to squat. And then if you look at certain Eastern cultures, squatting is very common. It's how they sit. That's just the way it is. And they maintain that ability to access that range of motion. And it's not that here in the West, where we tend to sit on chairs and we don't tend to squat, ass to grass, it's not that we've experienced some sort of major ankle trauma or hip trauma that prevents us to access that range of motion. It's just that we haven't accessed that range of motion since we're babies or children, and so we use it or lose it. Again, going back to a couple of episodes ago on energy balance, your body has this budget. It has a certain amount of energy to cover all of its bases: brain, heart, lungs, liver, and everything else that's less important. Ankle mobility isn't important. Hip flexion isn't important when you're chronically stressed and you barely have enough energy for your liver to run at optimal function. So hopefully this is making sense, that all of these things are tied together, and we can't separate the energy balance equation from something like mobility and the physical structure. So people, in the East or in certain Eastern cultures, they squat and they continue to squat, and into old age they squat because that's just how they live their lives, and they do not lose that ability to do that. So that's a sort of your best case scenario with a lack of mobility. Maybe it's just because of the lack of use, and the way we're going to combat that is to reintroduce movement, and that's at a very basic level. Then we want to do this in a way that's going to be beneficial for the brain. So I want the brain to feel like, so if we take the example of squatting, maybe as a baby I was able to squat perfectly because that is the potential range of motion, and my range of motion hadn't been impaired yet because I was in perfect health and I was doing great. If I want to restore that ability, I'm not going to throw 200 kilos on a bar and squat down and just force myself into that position, because that's going to feel tremendously unsafe for the brain and I'm likely to injure myself. So we want to do all of these movements again with the brain on our side. We're working with the brain, we're building a compelling case for the brain, because the brain is very, very protective, and it's working off the information that it can get, and the compelling information that it has is that movement isn't useful because you're not using it, so there's no point having access to it, or that movement is associated with a traumatic injury, so why would I go there again? So you need to build the compelling case. You're in the courtroom and you're pointing to evidence and exhibit A, exhibit B, and saying, look, it's safe to do this, look, I have the capacity to do this much, look, I have the capacity to do a little bit more, and look, I've taken care of the energy balance, and look, my body feels safe because of all these other peripheral things I'm doing. So that's for other things, that's for general health. We want to be healthy, but specifically for movement and how you're going to use this is we're going to use our breath. Again, the reason why I harp on and on about breath is because that's sort of it's your most fundamental vital function, and it's the quickest way to induce reliably stress or a lack of stress in the body. So you can get someone to hyperventilate, and that will create stress on a physiological level. Or if someone is stressed, you can regulate the breathing, and that is going to be the quickest, sort of natural, easily accessible way without getting, a sedative injected into you. The easiest way for you to tap into to bring that stress down, to bring it, to regulate it. So what we're going to do is, as we're moving, we're going to be breathing gently. In through the nose, should be a gentle pause, out through the nose. I won't go into too much detail. I've covered breathing in the past many times. I can link to episodes on that, but make sure that you've watched that to really grasp this. And again, to use an analogy, I want to kind of think of, I have my comfort zone, which might be a sphere, might be a circle, and beyond that is the unknown. It's what I'm not familiar with. So I don't want to pierce through into that and dive into that unknown. I want to gently ebb and flow with movement, pulsating movement, generally and gently pushing the boundary a bit further out. So if I'm moving my arm up, there's this point here at a flexion of about 90 degrees where I get that pinch. So I'm going to go to that point or just short of the pain and back out. Flex again, just short of the pain and back out. So when I get to that point of pain, I'm poking the bear, I'm threatening the brain. I'm moving to a point that is threatening to the brain, and we don't want to do that. So we want to build the confidence just short of that point of pain, just short of that point of unnecessary tension and bracing. So it's not necessarily going to be pain that you're dealing with. It could be that you get to a certain position and you start to tense up, you start to clench, you start to hold your breath. We want to go just short of that. So if we have this circle and the circle is green and everything outside of that is red, and we want to not go too far into that. We want to go just short of that and allow us to gently expand, because as you move in and out of that, you're building confidence, you're building time in that position, and your brain is getting more information saying, okay, that's possible, I'm capable of that. Okay, I got there without any pain, I got there without it feeling threatening. Let's go a bit further, let's allow ourselves to go a bit further. And it's the same concept of the warm-up. If you were to get up and straight away you sprint up the hill, versus you get up, you move around, you stretch out, you have a good breakfast, you get warmed up, you do your active mobility, a little jogging, hopping on the spot, and then you sprint up the hill. That's a different thing. And in the course of that morning, of that preparation, you're easing into things, you're getting things feeling a bit better, a bit more confident, you're giving the brain far more information to work with. And with that accurate information, again, you're building your compelling case. You're saying, look, I have strength here, I have mobility there, I've got warmth, I've got energy from the food I've eaten, I've got this confidence. And so the brain takes all of this into account, and it allows you further access. And this is all happening. I'm making it sound a bit kind of ridiculous, but it's all happening at this, extremely fast, like reflexive level. So we're never going to reason with this consciously. You're never going to talk, sit down and have a talk with your brain and say, look, you need to let me have further access of my shoulder flexion. So these things are happening like in split seconds. I don't even know how fast it happens, but it's really, really fast. But your brain is gathering information from the joints, from the nerves, and every little position, and it's building a more accurate representation of itself, of the entire body. Because like I said, your brain has this map of the entire body, but that map can be smudged, it can be inaccurate, and we want to gather information by doing these movements, by being in these positions, so that when we're in that positions, the nerve endings are gathering the information of the position of the joints, what's going on, and everything. And it's transmitting that to the brain, and the brain is saying, okay, that's fine, yeah, I'm getting a clearer picture of what it's like to have this joint in that position, and actually it's fine. And an interesting thing that you can think about is, if you've ever had a tooth pulled out, is that suddenly you sort of obsessively run your tongue along the inside of your mouth, and you're feeling the space where the tooth was. And you can think of that as you're rebuilding that picture of what your mouth is, because you have a knowledge of what your mouth is, its structure, what's where, what's what, not necessarily consciously, but your brain is doing all of this on some level, and it has that mapped out. But a tooth's been pulled out, and now that's it's a significant structural change, and your brain needs to update that picture of what's going on, of what's there. If something's taken away from me, I need to have a more accurate representation of what I am now. So that's, maybe you've never had a tooth pulled out, but if you have, that's a nice way of thinking about it. But basically, we're going to think about gently moving in and out, and in the next episodes, I'm going to do a series on movement exploration and restoring joint motion, joint by joint. So I'm going to start from the feet up to the head, and I'm going to go through everything and all these, and combine all of these different techniques for each of those, and that's going to give you a really good sense of yourself, a good awareness of your body. So I won't go into too much detail, I just want to give you this overarching theme. So, and the first thing we want to do is gentle movement exploration, movement variety. So like I said, as a child you were able to squat, no problem, and maybe now you can't, or maybe now you can't quite to the same extent, and it's not because of a traumatic injury, it's because you just haven't squatted in all of that time. So maybe you start to introduce gentle squats without any weight, or with your heels raised, or whatever. Just you start to explore more movement in your life, and that's going to be generally beneficial, because really we should be moving throughout the day. We should be fairly physically active. That's going to be a major part of maintaining good energy balance, is getting the the benefits of movement, the mechanical pumping and getting rid of waste that comes from movement, the lymphatic flow that comes from movement, and the heat generation, which can help with your metabolism and all these things. So again, at this very, very basic level, without getting too much into like a very specific traumatic injury, what we want is gentle movement exploration and say, okay, what are my boundaries? What is the point at which I feel pain or discomfort or unnecessary tension or clenching or breath holding? And can I get to just short of that? Can I move in and out, oscillating in and out to that point, just short of that tension, just short of that threat perception, whatever way that manifests, whether it's pain, unnecessary tension, breath holding, that kind of thing. So I'm going to oscillate in and out, and you want to get this kind of, the way you can kind of think about it is like this infinity loop, this figure of 8 kind of thing, the infinity loop. I'm sure you know it, but I'll put it on the video. This kind of oscillating back and forth and looping back and forth. It's a very gentle swaying movement, and it's very soothing. And repetitive movements like this that are rhythmic, you can use music for this, but rhythmic movements that are repetitive and gentle are a really nice way to make the body feel safe. And because you're getting a lot of repetitions, you're getting a lot of reps and a lot of information, but it's all very gentle, easy, comfortable. So movements, this is going to work a bit more for full body movements, but trying to think of this infinity pattern and oscillating in and out and back and forth, and gently we're going to that point just short of the threat perception. And what we're going to find is that the circle of what our comfort zone is, of what our active range of motion is going to expand, maybe in all directions, maybe just in one direction, whatever that is, but it's going to go a bit further because your brain now has better information, and now it's saying, okay, this is safe, I'm granting you access, I'm giving you permission to go that bit further. And that's what we want. We don't want to force that, we want to earn it by building a compelling case. So gentle breathing, in through the nose, out through the nose. It should be easy, it should be comfortable, and oscillating, gentle movements, exploring, and make this kind of, allow yourself to just kind of not overthink this. A lot of we can get really caught up in exercise and like, this is how you do the exercise and it needs to be perfect posture. And we kind of have this idea of what movement is and what movement should be like. But allow yourself to just move. Maybe put on some music and just move. So put on your favorite song, something that really just energizes you. And think about a body part that's sore or that's a bit limited, and see how can you move in a way that explores, you know, what's going on at that joint and what you're able to do, and maybe get a bit further. And again, the overarching thing that we want to do, that we need to do, is convince the brain that it's safe. So things like music, things like rhythmic movement, making it playful, making it fun, making a game out of it. These are really, really nice ways to create safety and make this more about just like the joy of having a body and the joy of being able to use that body, rather than I'm doing my mobility and I need to do these robotic movements and I need to curl the weight in this exact way. Like fitness and exercise is so divorced from, like, in a lot of cases, so divorced from the joy of just moving and just I don't know how to put it into words. It's amazing. Like it's something that maybe you've lost, maybe you don't really recognize anymore, but that ability to have a body that's sort of vibrant and feeling springy and ready to go. But anyway, I won't go off on a tangent too much on that. Point is, let's make this playful, let's make this fun and safe. Gentle movement, gentle breathing, and so on. The next thing we want to do is a simple thing that kind of ties into that, is learning through contrast. So this is kind of doing a bit less. What we want to do is kind of establish a baseline and maybe just do one side. So explore what your right side can do, then explore what the left side can do. And you'll often find that you have a bad side, quote, in inverted commas. So let's start with the bad side. Let's establish the two, what's what, what feels tense, and let's work on the bad side. Let's do these gentle movements, back and forth, oscillating, gentle breathing, make it playful, whatever way you want to do that. And then we go back and we move the right side and we move the left side. And what we're looking for is the contrast between right and left that becomes narrower. So the difference between right and left becomes narrower. And maybe the left side becomes better than the right. It's a really nice way of learning through contrast and through sort of doing less. You're learning from the distinction between the side that didn't do anything and the side that did a little bit more. And that's showing your brain, okay, this is what's possible. If I do a little bit of this, I can actually make my bad side, in inverted commas, better than my good side. So this is particularly good for lower limbs, feet, legs, working just on one side. Going for a walk, working then on the bad side, and then going for a walk again. It's something you do a lot in anatomy and motion, and you're just gathering information and you're learning. And again, that's what we're doing. We're building a compelling case. We're giving the brain more accurate information about what's going on and what's possible. We're updating that body map and that awareness. So yeah, learning through contrast is the other little thing that you can add in. Now, the next technique is probably the most demanding technique. It definitely is the most demanding technique, and it's called an isometric contraction. So like I said, your brain needs information. Your brain is controlling everything. Your brain allows you to do whatever you're going to do, or it will stop you. And essentially what we need is more information. We need accurate information of what's possible. And the way we can do that is with an isometric contraction. It's a very, very gentle way. So basically, an isometric contraction is when a muscle is contracting, but it doesn't really shorten. So if I'm flexing my shoulder forward, if I block myself at 90 degrees, so if I take my left hand and I block myself at my wrist, at the wrist of my right hand, and now I'm trying to bring my arm up further, but it's meeting resistance. And you can do this with a wall. Basically, you're contracting into resistance. Now, what's happening now at my right shoulder is that I'm getting an intense contraction, but the joint isn't actually moving. It's not significantly moving. It's contracting, but it's kind of locked in this position. Contraction creates a lot of sensory information for the brain. It creates a lot of information, and the lack of movement at the joint is very safe because you're kind of locked in this position that you're confident in. So nothing sudden is going to happen, nothing unexpected is going to happen, and you're getting that rich information from the muscle contraction and everything that's going on there. So an isometric contraction is just this very safe way to drive a lot of rich information to the brain so that I can get a really accurate idea of what's going on, of what's possible. And so it's building a clearer picture again of that body map. And so we can try this now. Again, we're going to explore this in more detail with individual joints, but what you can do is, if you have a desk, if you have anything that you can push into a wall, let's go palm down, let's go palm down on a desk. And what I want you to do is to push into the desk, push into the wall, whatever it is, and it's like you're trying to swipe down, like you're trying to bat a fly or swat a fly. And you're getting this nice strong contraction. What should happen is that you need to find a position that feels safe. So when you build this contraction, it should feel like the joints are kind of locking in this positive way, that feels like your structure is kind of locked in and strong. So it shouldn't feel precarious. You want to find that range of motion where you feel safe. So usually if you're sitting upright and your hand is just pushing down into a desk or into a wall, everything's strong, feeling good. we're going to build that tension. And what I want is to get this kind of humming contraction across all the muscles. Like you can feel them coming online, building tension, working together, and this really, really strong effort. You can play around with this depending on different techniques. Some will do maximal effort, some will build the effort, so they'll do 10%, then 20% effort, 30%, and so on, and they'll build the tension and then relax. There are different merits to different techniques, but for now, I just want you to get this awareness of, I'm building that tension, I'm getting this rich information, I'm feeling strong, and that's it. There's no sudden movement, there's nothing like that. And once you understand that concept, you can apply that to a joint. So maybe there is, like I said, we have maybe this point of the range of motion that we don't feel confident getting into. The brain isn't giving us access to that. And we want to go just short of that. We want to think about what muscles will contract to bring me into that space. So if I take my shoulder again, I have this point at 90 degrees where I have this pinch. So what do? I go to 85 degrees or whatever. I go to whatever point is pain-free. So maybe 85 degrees. And there's no pain. It feels perfectly fine. And I begin to contract up into that position as if I'm trying to get to 90 degrees, but I'm blocking myself. I'm contracting into resistance. And I'm in a position that feels safe, that doesn't create pain. And I'm building this tension, building this sensory information. Then I'm going to relax, and then I'm going to try and explore movement into my outside of my comfort zone, so into that 90 degree range. I'm going to see, can I get to that 90 degree range without recreating the pain? You might need to play around with this and do this a few times, but what we're aiming to do and what should happen is that as we build confidence and good sensory information just short of the painful point, we will be able to gain access to that painful point. And now it might be that we feel no pain at 90 degrees, but we go to 100 degrees and that's when the pain sets in now. So the same thing, we go just short of that, we find the point just short of the pain where it feels good, it feels strong, the closest point to the point of pain that feels strong. We're going to contract there and build confidence there, relax, and then try and go a bit further. So you go just short of the, you go to the point of the end point of your comfort zone, and you contract and you build confidence, and then you relax, and then you go back up, but try and go a bit further. And as you're going further, you're trying to expand the comfort zone. And what should happen is, with this good sensory information that's coming from the contraction and the familiarity that's coming from that, your brain should say, this is safe, you can go a bit further. And so you go a bit further, and you are earning the right to move your shoulder past 90 degrees. Because to this point, again, to use the shoulder example, at 90 degrees, I have pain. So I'm going to go just short of that, and I'm going to earn the right to go up to 90 degrees and beyond. And you're just building that up. But that's a really, really good way to do that. And the people who do this probably the best are functional range conditioning. They do what are called PAILs and rails, progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. And it's a very systematized way of doing this. You'll find a lot of this stuff online, and you can find a lot of great therapists who do this stuff. I'm not formally trained in it myself, but I was taught in college like a pretty identical form of doing things. It's just maybe not as formalized. But in any case, we'll get into that in individual videos, and I will share some resources for you if you want to explore specific joints. But that's basically it. We are restoring movement through, and this is more a demanding way of doing this. It's closer to this idea of building strength and fitness, and it's going to be something that you want to don't use this as the first course of action. Explore the movement first with the more gentle methods, because the downside of this kind of training and this kind of mobility training, which is arguably the best form of mobility training, is that it's extremely energy demanding. So I will say that, because the past few episodes I've been talking about energy balance as being this key thing that underpins health issues, that we can't restore proper health unless we address energy balance. And these kinds of isometric contractions are extremely energy demanding. And this is something I've noticed with people who get really, really good mobility programs. They go to excellent therapists who know this stuff inside out. Like I said, the functional range conditioning stuff, all that stuff, these guys are experts. And these people in pain, they go to them and they get perfect programs, and I've seen the programs and I can't fault them. But this underlying energy balance issue isn't addressed. So they don't actually make the progress because their body doesn't have the energetic capacity to do that. So this is why energy balance is so fundamental, and you could have the best possible program, the best possible treatment, but that's treating something that's less fundamental, and it's not addressing these fundamental functions of the body. So just to be very clear on that, because I see a lot of people just wasting their time because they're not addressing that stuff. But that's isometric contraction, a lot of great resources on that, and I'm going to link to those in the show notes. And in the coming series of videos, which is called Know Your Bones, you're going to get to know all your various bones and joints and muscles and how they move, and you're going to build a very strong and good awareness of yourself and how your body moves. You're going to become reacquainted with your body. I'm going to be exploring isometric contractions for each of the joints, but it's important to be very clear that it's not something you want to necessarily do straight away, because you may need to address energy balance issues first. So that's it for today. A bit shorter than usual, even though it's not short, but it's good for me. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found that beneficial. You can let me know if you have any questions. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. It really, really helps. I can't stress that enough. If there's someone you know who needs this, pass it on to them. Throw a like there on YouTube. It helps the algorithms. Share it. Leave a comment. I'm happy to help out. And most importantly, sign up for the newsletter. That's the place to be. That's the place where you will always get my information. I'm probably not going to get deplatformed anywhere, but you never know. These things happen. So newsletter is the place to go. Sign up for that, and you will get this information no matter what, whether I end up off YouTube or whatever. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Have a great day.